Welcome back to the Telco Drift, a podcast exploring tech, telecoms, and other sci-fi stories. I'm Pablo, your host, and in today's episode, I'm joined by Kristin Paulin, Principal Analyst at Omdia. Kristin, welcome to the Telco Drift.
Thank you, Pablo. I enjoy watching your podcast on a regular basis, and I'm really pleased to be here today as a guest.
Okay, amazing. And, very, very, very good to have you here on the show. And we're going to discuss one of the biggest telco markets in the world. So we're going to discuss what is happening in the US telco market, what different mobile operators are doing. But before we go there, can you just provide a quick introduction about yourself, sort of a little bit of your sort of life as an analyst, and then anything else that is relevant or interesting for the audience?
Yes, of course. So, as you said, I'm a principal analyst at Omdia. I cover the North America markets, and in my role, I contribute to two different teams. We have a service provider markets team where I contribute to the Americas markets. And then I also work on our consumer 5G and broadband monetization team. And my research covers various key developments in North America, focus a little bit on the service provider strategic initiatives, looking a bit at market dynamics, and a little bit of special focus on 5G and fiber.
And is in the latter role that you're collaborating with one of the previous guests, Nicole from
Absolutely.
Australia?
Yes, your consumer roundup to, I think it was your first episode of the year, sort of kicking off the new year. And yes, she is one of my colleagues now. And we've co-written a few reports together in the past year or two.
Oh, nice. So, bye, Nicole, if you're watching,
She'll watch.
she's gonna enjoy the shout out. But anyway, so let's get back on the actual topic of the podcast. So if you're looking at the three big American telcos, and then we can discuss whether we should say three or any other number how it was before. But I'm wondering, what is the greatest asset you think that each of the telco has in the market? What would you say is the key differentiator maybe that we can see between the three of them?
Yes. I think you can look at it in a few ways. First, if we just talk about their assets as far as a bit more physical assets, just to kick it off. For AT&T, it's definitely their fiber network. They have the largest fiber network in the US. Verizon's certainly catching up now with their recent acquisition of Frontier, but AT&T is still ahead by a couple of million. And their fiber network is huge in their mobile strategy as well, because they are very focused on convergence. When they move into new fiber areas, their goal is to then pick up the wireless customers and bundle them together. And that's really been contributing to their growth in the recent years, especially since they streamlined their focus to 5G and fiber about 5 years ago now. And then for T-Mobile and Verizon, I think of it a little bit more in terms of the spectrum that they have. So T-Mobile has a spectrum portfolio that has allowed it to have an early lead in 5G, a sustained lead in 5G, and it's setting it up for an early introduction into 6G. So when I talk about the spectrum, I mean their mid-band, the 2.5 that they acquired in the Sprint acquisition, as well as a nationwide swath of the 600 megahertz low band that they had free and clear to use to implement for 5G earlier than the other peers in the market as far as a nationwide coverage. And then for Verizon, similarly with spectrum, they killed it in the C-band auction. They walked away with the largest amount, and that has really set them up for both mobile and FWA ambitions. So they have been able to implement great mid-band coverage, and they still haven't finished. They were sort of picking and choosing where they needed it in order to make sure they had a great customer experience in whatever markets were starting to sort of get filled up. But then, if I could expand a little bit beyond the sort of physical assets, I like to think of the three operators as sort of their own personas. Nicole McCormick and I did this in a report, and I think it's just a perfect example. So we call T-Mobile the built-in VAS leader. They defend their best value position fiercely. Their 5G plans are chock full of VAS. And then you have Verizon sitting there as a more premium differentiator. They have a high and growing postpaid ARPA, and they kind of still see their customers as a bit immune to the higher prices, although that's certainly been changing. And they focused on unbundling the VAS with their more innovative My Plan, which is an opportunity for them to continually upsell customers who might choose to add on additional perks. And then AT&T, as I was mentioning with their fiber, we consider them the convergence leader. They're really not concerned with the VAS, adding on any additional entertainment perks in with their mobile plans. Instead, they're very laser focused on their convergence strategy, picking up the wireless customers as they expand into more fiber areas.
That's quite interesting because, I mean, fiber is fascinating in a sense. We have few colleagues that cover fiber, right? And I found it like a very difficult topic to be excited about in a sense. But it does make sense that sort of shows more of the practicality, if you want, of an offering, right? So you're bundling fiber and mobile. You may not have particularly exciting value-added services, but at the end of the day, sort of makes rational sense from your wallet point of view. So I think that's quite interesting. And then you go all the way, as you mentioned, sort of Verizon somewhere in the middle, and then T-Mobile all the way, sort of mobile heavy center with us and so on. And we know that T-Mo has been buying a couple of fiber companies, so maybe they're shifting a little bit more in that direction. But I think since the US is such a large country, it takes a lot to cover things. But if we then, okay, we've seen the assets, right? And we have these three personas of like what everyone is doing well in terms of getting the revenues, customers, numbers, and so on. If we need to think about challenges, then where do you see sort of the critical challenge for each one of these personas?
Well, first, obviously, there would be similar challenges that they're all facing, especially right now, as far as continued elevated inflation, rising costs, hesitant consumer spending with the sort of economic instability that we're seeing today. And then it's a very mature market. So growing subscriptions and revenues is challenging for all of them. And similarly, gaining enough spectrum in a timely manner for 5G going into 6G, that's still a sort of wait and see with the way the US regulator is. And then, of course, they are seeing some competition, all of them from the lower end, from cable MVNOs. But looking at each of their challenges individually, I talked about AT&T and their convergence in a very positive way, but I really see this actually as a challenging situation for them too, because I feel like they have their blinders on. They're so focused on it and it's working for them. But at some point, they're going to need to offer something in order to be able to poach the customers from their rivals. I mean, at some point, they are going to finish their fiber expansion and, well, I don't know what's left then. So I really think they need to start thinking about that. And they're also the only one of the three that doesn't offer a network slice. Now, at this point, in terms of the consumer side, we don't have consumer network slices from T-Mobile. There's only one from Verizon, but that's just an area that AT&T hasn't competed in. It doesn't have a first responder network like Verizon and T-Mobile do. So they're just kind of a little too laser focused in convergence for my tastes. And then for T-Mobile, it sounds kind of positive, but they have been so early to market with certain aspects of 5G standalone network slicing. So they've had to spend a lot of time making mistakes, working through use cases, things that foster the ecosystem in general, which their competitors have benefited from in the sense that they can move quicker when they do move. So I do feel like that could be potentially continuing for T-Mobile. And then for Verizon.
So if I can just interrupt
Yeah,
you a
please.
second, effectively it's like a kid that has never learned the tough lessons on the street type of scenario for T-Mobile. Is that a good, way of framing it?
Yeah, I feel like they aren't an old guard telco, right? Like AT&T and even Verizon, they're a little bit more bureaucratic, slower moving. T-Mobile has been very agile, and they've been able to be really innovative and move quite quickly in different areas. And yeah, I think they're, yeah, you could say the kid on the street that hasn't really had a lot of challenges to this
You
point.
can say if it doesn't make sense as a visualization. I just
No.
like to try to visualize things, but it makes sense because Timo has had that incredible growth recently after the merger with Sprint. Right, they effectively changed their
Mhm.
DNA and the strategy. We all know about and they have moved from positives to positives. While the other ones have sort of going through ups and downs a little bit more, so maybe they are a little bit better suited in a way of like kind of soaking up those punches that eventually every telco is gonna have to take. But yeah,
Yeah.
let's go back to Verizon then.
Okay. Yeah. One thing with T-Mobile is I've been thinking a little bit lately about 6G. So T-Mobile has already said that they plan to, they're looking at 2029, and from what I understand, 2030 is more the time frame. Maybe as far as standards, I'm not particularly versed on the technological parts there, but we saw Verizon move with 5G a bit ahead of standards, and it did not end up making them an early leader in 5G. So there is somewhat of a risk to getting ahead of standards. So I'm not fully sure what their plan is for 6G, but that could potentially end up being a challenge down the road. But yes, for Verizon, last fall they have gained new leadership that kind of wanted to shake things up. They want to look at some cost cutting, in sort of slimming down sort of some of the things in a sense that we saw with AT&T when they decided against continuing to try to become a media company on top of a telco and everything. And then they kind of went back to streamlining. I feel like in a sense, Verizon could be there right now, but they've always had this best network persona, and it's like stuck to them like glue. But it's not necessarily the case. So they're still seen kind of as premium, but what they really need is to evolve to something like their network. They can't be a best network. They maybe don't want to live in the premium zone either, because they have been struggling with some growth in subscribers, over the past year or two. And so I think they need to find sort of what their new niche is. I saw that their new leadership said they want to delight customers with the best overall value. I mean, in a sense, that sounds a little T-Mobile like to me. So I think Verizon's challenge is sort of finding its new footing and
So
how
needs
it
to
wants to.
find its new DNA in a sense, and it's interesting because
Yeah.
I'm not from the US, but I do associate Verizon with a premium brand in a sense. Maybe I've read too many of their
Yeah.
marketing materials without knowing the plans, but because possibly they are so big and they've been kind of dominant, or maybe when I was covering tech a little bit more, I do have that perception. But yeah, if things are changing, maybe they need to find a slightly different persona, and they have the sort of very aggressive competition from Timo, and then also that very, as we mentioned, mature competition from AT&T. So it's difficult to be a premium provider unless it's clear cut why you're a premium provider. And by the way, I talk with all three telcos, and all three telcos are telling me they have the best network. I'm not going to ask
Exactly.
which one it is that really has it, but everyone is always telling me that, oh, we are better than the others because of our networks. You gotta love sort of the level of
Yeah.
confidence.
There's so many different aspects, that you can look at. You can be the best network in this way or this location. And yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and it's very much sort of a way of how you're framing it. I remember when I was, sort of when I'm covering private networks and I'm asking some of the telcos like who's the best vendor, and everyone is giving me like a different answer, and they say, well, it actually depends sort of what are you measuring in terms of one or two different aspects of it. Is that part of the technology stack? Is the whole technology stack? Is like how easy it is to work with them, so on and so forth. So always difficult to have those absolutes. But
Yeah.
if we need to think about the market now, and like three companies, I believe they're all doing fairly well, like decently well, with someone overperforming. But what do you think is most important to win in the US market? Is it sort of the tech leadership? Is the strategy, or is it just size that at the end of the day sort of helps you with economies of scale, so on and so forth? What do you think is critical to win now, but also win in the future as we then move on towards next generation of Gs?
There's definitely something to be said for scale. We are definitely seeing that. There's much more on the fixed side right now because that's where the opportunities are. But definitely scale for cost efficiencies and things like that are definitely important. But if you're giving me the options between strategy, the money, and the technology, I go with strategy. And I can cite some examples that come to mind. But as far as strategy, if you don't have the right strategy, the right roadmap, the right execution, even if you have the right technology, it's not going to set you up to be winning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, money, that's different because in order to execute on that strategy,
Yeah.
you do need the funding there. But the examples I think of are, again, with T-Mobile. They started with some smart decisions. Maybe there was some luck in there too. But back when they acquired Metro PCS in 2013, it did give them some scale there. They were definitely a scrappy underdog back at that time. And then they launched their Un-carrier strategy right around that same time frame. And that ongoing to today, but was very successful for them. And it really shook up the market. It gave them the sort of consumer focus. The consumers trusted their message as being a consumer oriented company. And then they went on, as you mentioned earlier, to acquire Sprint to 2020. And with that, not only came larger scale, but that huge amount of 2.5 spectrum that really allowed them to lay the groundwork for their 5G sort of leadership in this era. And then since then, that allowed them to then continue to sort of lead in other areas of 5G, the 5G standalone. And so it was really a lot of the foresight that they had about what they would need to get to this point today. And we can look at the flip side. We can talk about Dish.
We should talk about this. I was curious to hear your thoughts on great expectation at a certain point in time. Probably not delivered. Don't know how to say it nicely. So yeah,
Yeah.
what happened there is like there were a lot of talks about sort of how that network, because how it was built, cloud native and so on and so forth, was gonna make it more adaptable, better suited for like scales, coverage services, and so on. So what happened there?
Yeah. I'll start with strategy, but just to first say that the technology I think was a good idea. The 5G Open RAN network. But first, they never really found their footing. And they were trying to become a fourth player in a mature market with three strong leaders. and they didn't have any real expertise in the wireless market themselves. They also didn't really provide any sort of differentiator, and they also even had sort of a name issue. First, they launched a beta as Project Genesis, and then there was talk of them becoming Dish Wireless. But then they were Boost Infinite to separate it from their MVNO Boost Mobile, and then they decided to rebrand and put it all under Boost Mobile. It was just a bit confusing as far as, they just never really found their footing there. And then as far as money, gosh, it's really expensive to build out a 5G network. And the US is huge. And and at the same time, their satellite TV business is declining. So the profitability is going down. They're struggling to gain subscribers to their new wireless service. All the while, they've purchased all this. They have all this spectrum costs, all these build out costs. So they were struggling to meet these deadlines. It just, from the financial standpoint and the strategy standpoint, there was trouble. Now, like I said, the technology, I feel like the 5G Open RAN, it was great. It can result in the vendor flexibility, cost savings, all of that. And so it was a great part of the strategy, but it was also complex and it was new. And for them, having only a 5G network did have limitations for them because they had limited device support. There wasn't demand for some of the bands. So, the iPhone didn't support their bands, at least in the beginning. I don't know if it ever did. And they were having to deploy voice over new radio or depend on their MVNO relationships for fallback to LTE for voice. It just wasn't working for them there. So, as you know the story, they had to give back some.
To be fair, when you're putting it like that, it seems that they had like a lot of very large challenges all at the same time. And again, while trying to enter one of the most difficult markets globally, because again, you have like three among the largest telcos in the world is never going to be easy to attract customers. And I would imagine it also, even just trying like price-based competition is not probably going to be successful when you're spending money to deploy a nationwide network. Seems tough. Good idea though. I like the the idea of a fourth operator.
Yeah. And, definitely, I think the regulator did too, because the idea even came out of T-Mobile acquiring Sprint. It was Sprint selling off their prepaid brand Boost Mobile that then was Dish's foray into, the wireless area. But yeah, that didn't set themselves up. And they're not the only market to struggle to add a fourth player, which is often seen as kind of the way to be lowering prices in the market, adding that just enough extra competition.
Yeah, and I think I've seen sort of the UK has been going through consolidation in the mobile space. Italy has had 4 players with as a consumer perspective, I love how low the prices are here. But sort of
jealous.
With my analyst hat, I'm thinking like this is not sustainable. In fact, it's absolutely not from their point of view. But it struggles a little bit all over the world. But so you touch on Open RAN and sort of how it had potential, but was complex, and again deploying a large network. If we look at some of the key technologies that could be shaping sort of success or failure to achieve success for American telcos over the next 3 to 5 years, what would you say is going to be sort of something that will move the needle for any of these telcos?
So I would think of this in, I guess, a couple of different ways. I have to say AI. Everyone talks about AI. I know, but it is true in the sense that AI operators can use AI for network planning and optimization to provide the better customer experience. And if you're figuring out areas of your network where people are struggling to stay connected or more people are calling into customer service, if you can, if you're targeting that then and optimizing that's going to bring a better experience, and you're going to be able to keep your customers longer. And so you have that part. You have the AI. I'll still call it a promise because I don't know how much it's there today as far as helping with some sort of personalization from the customer care aspect, things that can satisfy the customer, to then things like T-Mobile having their new AI platform and offering now in beta, becoming soon the live translation. And they keep calling that the first of many services that will be offered that way. So there's so many different ways that AI is going to affect competition. But I have another little bit more basic technology, but I don't know if there's anything to talk about there before I go on.
No, I think for people that have listened to me, I've always been quite skeptical about AI because it is driving some revenues for some providers, some OEMs, and then the rest is promise, right? It's all we will be doing this, we will be doing that, and everyone is gonna be making money, but no one has ever shown me the money. And that's why I'm skeptical, Analyst. Well, you know that, but definitely, I
Hey, you're
think,
preaching to the choir.
yeah, is the type of everyone is gonna have to do, to use AI to a certain of larger to a certain extent. Like it's unthinkable, right? That you're not gonna use it, and probably who's gonna be better using it, had more innovative approach, may as well. Kind of have an advantage. I don't think that AI itself will decide who wins the game, but will definitely provide an advantage. Probably that would be how I frame it.
I can agree. Good point. So this next technology, like I said, the other idea I had is a little basic, but 5G Advanced, hear me out. They're as far as I understand, and you can tell me if you have any other sort of understandings, but 6G is going to be more evolutionary than revolutionary, the way that I read it. So much of what operators can be doing right now with 5G Advanced, it can be setting them up for 6G. The 5G Advanced and the 5G standalone architecture can be like the test bed for service providers to kind of gain early experience. And so it would be more of the first to market type of advantage than the only one to have that technology, because like you say, everyone is eventually gonna get there. But as far as like early leadership, I think what operators can do with 5G Advanced in the next 3 to 5 years can set them up for early successes and leading into 6G.
Currently, T-Mobile is the only one that has deployed to a certain extent 5G Advanced. Is that correct? As far as I know. But I never understand to what extent. I know they made some announcements, but
yes, exactly. And that positive of the extent either they did about a year ago announce that the 5G Advanced technology, I think, was nationwide for them, their capability. Both T-Mobile and AT&T have 5G Red Cap. I know that's still very nascent, but I'm not positive but I believe that is considered within 5G Advanced.
I should know this because it's part of the enterprise market. I think it depends how you see it. In a sense, does it need 5G Advanced? No. Is it part of the same release as 5G Advanced? Yes. I think that is sort of the line that is a little bit blurry, if I remember correctly. But if I'm wrong, someone comment and let me know that I got it wrong. And I believe that the Red Cap itself is more of a run upgrade rather than core.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, but
okay.
who knows?
That's
But interesting that you're seeing sort of age advance as, like a necessary stepping stones to learn those lessons before 6G arrives. And yeah, sort of the circular way. Yeah, 6G is going to be an evolution. As you said, I think, yeah, I pretty much see it the same way, but it will still have the possibility of kind of changing the order of success of the different telcos, doesn't it? Every time there is a new generation, is like, okay, a new game that is starting, so someone
Mm,
else can win, someone else can lead, and let's see what else, and everyone is going to try to kind of reset expectation and growth.
yeah, well said.
But I think that was like everything I wanted to touch on the sort of American market. Do you think that there is anything else that people that are listening should know about the American market? Anything else that you think is interesting, or that we should have discussed and that I forgot to to add to the agenda?
Well, very early in our conversation, when we were talking about the different personas for each of the operators, we touched a little bit about what they were doing with FWA, and you mentioned specifically T-Mobile and fiber. So if you want, I could circle back a little bit to that area and just the way that I see the three operators and their strategy as far as, where how FWA sort of fits into that. So AT&T was like anti FWA until much more recently. First they were thinking, okay, as we can use it as what they call copper catch for anyone that was, on DSL, and they were shutting down DSL. They could then keep them as customers by offering them FWA, and then all the while they're watching T-Mobile and Verizon and their FWA subscriptions grow and grow and grow. And then AT&T did sort of expand their interest in FWA, but they're not putting it in the forefront in any respect. But as far as like their fiber expansion, as they're planning to expand in fiber, they might go in first, offer FWA to customers in that area who they then plan to switch over to fiber once they deploy it. So they're kind of using it in this like, picking and choosing strategy. Whereas Verizon had a much smaller fiber footprint. So they were gung ho on FWA in the beginning. FWA gave them possibility of offering bundles in more areas of the country. Everything is about offering bundles of wireless and broadband these days. And so I see them as like they are interested in fiber, they are interested in FWA. And then T-Mobile, nearly complete opposite in a sense. They are getting into fiber, like you said, but it's not as their primary. They're like, yes, we acknowledge some people are going to prefer fiber for the qualities of that technology. So if any of our FWA customers want to become fiber customers, that just opens up a space in our network for a new FWA customer. They apparently have a long waiting list. So for them, they are still more focused on FWA in a sense. But as you said, they've been acquiring fiber operators along the way too. And in some sense, that is probably a competitive factor, against their main mobile rivals there. But so I didn't interrupt at the time to add that point in, but I did just kind of think that was sort of a
So
interesting thing to me.
FWA quite important then for the dynamics of the US market.
Yeah, yeah. It has shown staying power. When it first came, there was not a lot of expectations for experience, and people would try it and they would ditch it. But how many years later, and it's still growing.
Nice, and it's good. It's sort of a success story in the telco world, right? So if the technology is sort of working and delivering, and not it's not always the case, is it?
Yeah. What do they say? The first monetization of their 5G network, your first sort of additional service that was offered. So
And that's so what I like about FWA in a sense is that it has a pretty straightforward business case, right? Compared to some of the other things that so we didn't touch a lot about the slicing part. But slicing is quite difficult to monetize at the end of the day. Is at least for me is never that clear the specific benefits you're getting. So and I still think slicing is for enterprise and not consumer, despite what some other guests have said on, on this podcast and in general. But I'm biased, like everyone knows. I'm biased when when I'm thinking things. But yeah, no, very very good to see
right.
FWA. Now I think that's it from a tech and market perspective. But I believe you recently launched a podcast, and I'm quite interested to hear a little bit more about. Well, I already know the sort of the theme of the podcast, but it would be good for the audience to know a little bit more about what's the podcast about, what is the podcast about, and sort of anything relevant in that regard.
Yes, thank you. And I have to say, it was watching you have this podcast and grow this podcast that gave me some sense of confidence to try it. Now I am far behind where you are at this stage, but I honestly wouldn't have ever taken the plunge if I hadn't had some of the insights from you. So thank you for that.
You're
And yes,
welcome.
my podcast, I call it Kristin's Next Chapter. It's a part of my slightly larger book brand where I focus on supporting authors and engaging with other fellow book lovers. So we've been talking about tech this whole time. And for me, in this digital era with all this AI, it's really important to have what I'm calling analog habits to keep us balanced, to make sure you're going for walks or cooking or doing puzzles or reading, whatever your preference is, to move away from the screens for a little bit and engage your mind in a different way. And so for me, I enjoy many of the things that I just mentioned, but reading is really my passion. And that's what I've been sort of deep diving in. And so my podcast it's a short format as a single host. It's me. I publish every other week right now. Each episode has a sort of different topic theme and plenty of book recommendations. So far, my topics have included top 10 reads from 2025, setting book-related goals for 2026, everything that I think is so great about book clubs, why we need to support debut authors, and how to incorporate your love of books into your travel plans. And so as far as my episodes go, everything's been solo, but I would love to include conversations with other fellow book lovers or authors or anyone really in the book community. So if there is anyone in your audience who is interested, feel free to reach out. But I've personally been really enjoying this new medium and trying to put my thoughts out there and share what I think is so great about books today.
Fantastic, and definitely, I'm gonna sort of put your LinkedIn contact and podcast, podcast link in the description. So anyone that is interested in sort of hearing more about Kristin Next Chapter can just reach out directly to you.
I did bring some book recommendations if we still have time.
Yeah, of course. It's plenty of time.
All right.
Like one of the good things about running your own podcast is that you can just decide, to talk a little bit longer, right?
Perfect. And everyone can stop. So I chose books for maybe interest in your audience. My first book is Culpability by Bruce Holsinger. So this book explores moral responsibility in the age of AI through a family drama that centered on a fatal car crash involving their self-driving minivan. The story follows the family as they confront the aftermath of the crash, questioning who's to blame, the teenage son who is driving, the AI itself, or the parents, one of which is a key AI researcher in the story. And the book delves into themes of family, AI, moral responsibility, corporate power, and the challenges of raising children in a tech-saturated world. And it was an Oprah Book Club pick last year. So that's Culpability by Bruce Holsinger.
That's very on point.
Yeah, and I did read it for a book club, and it was a really interesting discussion. And AI was that much newer last year, so it's really interesting. My second one is Project Hail Mary. So you may be seeing this as a movie right now. A big movie just came out last week, starring Ryan Gosling and an alien named Rocky. So it's a sci-fi novel about a lone astronaut, Rylan Grace. He wakes up with amnesia on his spaceship, and he's tasked with saving the Earth from a sun-dimming algae called astrophage. So the story follows his journey, rediscovering the mission on this spaceship and meeting an alien and working together. He has the same problem on his planet, and they're trying to work together to find a solution. The book has themes of survival, discovery, friendship, sacrifice, and the meaning of being human. And it is a fantastic book and movie. So I highly recommend this one.
Has the movie gone out on the cinema or on some of the platforms?
It went to the cinema, at least in the US, last week. It's in Amazon Studios, so I'm not sure how quickly they would end up on the streamers, but I would look for it on Amazon when it does. And the last one is called, it's not science fiction or about AI. It's called The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. And in this one, the main character, Sybil Van Antwerp, has always expressed herself best through letters. Over her lifetime, she's written letters with friends, family, authors, customer service, sort of anyone. And now she's in her 70s, and she's sort of facing some hard truths about her past and seeking forgiveness. And the book explores the human connection, seeking forgiveness, and building a full life at any point by opening yourself up to it. And the reason that I included this book is because it's an epistolary novel, which means it's told entirely through letters. And that's why I'm including it, because I think it fits nicely with the analog habits theme. I gave this book and some stationery to my mom for Christmas, and we've been exchanging snail mail letters ever since.
Aww.
So it's kind of a nice way to keep up some little analog habits in.
I do like some epistolary novels, more on the horror side of things, though. Like Dracula, sort of classic one, and then Frankenstein as well. I'm not sure it's epistolary, but sort of the same style, anyways.
I didn't realize
thank you
that.
very much, Kristin. I really appreciate you sharing some of the books as well. Definitely adding them to my reading list, and I think that sort of brings everything to a closure. So thank you again, Kristin, for joining me on the Drift. And to the audience, just reach out to Kristin and leave comments or get in touch with myself or with Kristin again for tech or books or anything. Have a great day.
Thanks, Pablo.